All right, what's going on, everyone? Let's take a look at some updates as it relates to the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. I'm recording this at 9 a.m. Central Time on Tuesday, October 17th, 2023. So there might be news that comes out after this and before it is updated that will not make it into this video. So the airstrikes have continued. Israeli airstrikes have continued over Gaza. The IDF announced that Osama Mazzini, the head of the Shura Council of Hamas, was killed in one of those strikes. One more Hamas leader taken off the battlefield. Now, it's worth noting that not all of Hamas's leadership is in Gaza. So I'll put up a graphic here that the IDF released. Really from Mohammed Deif down into the right. Those are the groups and the sections of Hamas, if you will, that will be in Gaza or likely in Gaza. Everything above that is going to be somewhat international, spread across the Middle East in places like Syria, Iran, and the UAE, as well as others. So one thing to keep an eye on as this war progresses is as Israel and Israel's allies talk about the complete eradication of Hamas, that cannot be completed simply within Gaza or within Gaza in the West Bank or within Israel. It's going to have to go international. And the way that would likely look would be assassinations abroad. Now, Israel has been accused of assassinating Hamas leaders in foreign countries in the past. Haven't seen anything to that degree in the last 10 days since this war kicked off. But again, if the dismantlement of the entire Hamas organization is part of the goal, that is going to have to be a component of it, you would think. Now, moving into the hostage situation, again, the total number released by the IDF is 199. We're getting different figures now from the Al-Qassam Brigade, the militant wing of Hamas. They released on Telegram saying, quote, the prisoner count ranges between 200 and 250 prisoners, with Al-Qassam currently holding 200. Again, remember that there were multiple groups taking part in the attack on Israel on October 7th. So Al-Qassam saying that they hold some of the prisoners. There's other groups that might have others. They say, we keep a diverse group of individuals currently under temporary custody, hailing from different nationalities. These individuals are considered our esteemed guests, and our primary goal is to ensure their safety. We will release individuals from various nationalities under temporary custody when the on-ground conditions permit it. Now, I mentioned in previous videos that we really haven't seen much in terms of proof of life, videos, images, anything like that, or when or how these hostages could be released. That changed in the last 24 hours. Hamas put out a video of them treating an Israeli girl for wounds that she had sustained either during the October 7th attack or since, who's in their custody. Now, just a personal opinion, I'm not going to show that video. I don't like to show videos of prisoners of war or hostages. I just think they're in a compromised situation, not something I like to put out there into the public and to spread around. Now, in terms of the ground offensive, again, most people are expecting some sort of IDF offensive to take place and move into Gaza sometime in the near future. I think a handful of folks expected it to have already started. Now, an IDF spokesperson said, quote, we are preparing for the next stages of war. We haven't said what they will be. Everybody's talking about the ground offensive. It might be something different. Now, a couple notes on that. First, I feel like they kind of have to say that, even though the IDF has Gaza completely surrounded. They have total air superiority. They're able to mass troops in the open on the border as they prepare for this invasion. It doesn't hurt to kind of throw a little misdirection in there from time to time and maybe get Hamas to think that the ground offensive isn't happening, so you can't completely discount that. But he's also talking about the next stage of the war. He's not talking about the totality of this entire operation or this entire conflict. So it is possible that something else might take place next. That could be small-scale targeted raids into sections of Gaza, maybe focused on trying to rescue some of these hostages. Again, that's just complete speculation on my part, but if we're going to read between the lines from what the IDF spokesperson says, that it might be something different than a ground invasion, one thing that could kind of bridge that gap between airstrikes and an all-out land force moving into Gaza could be special operations type targeted raids. The IDF also stated that 600,000 civilians have evacuated. Now, when they say evacuated, that's portions of Gaza City, other portions of Gaza generally moving south. Worth noting, the evacuation is not of Gaza itself. We're going to talk more about the Rafah gate here in a second with Egypt, but those are going to be internally displaced people. So they're no longer in their homes. Many of them, hopefully not in Gaza City, where the majority of the Israeli strikes are taking place. But 600,000, according to the IDF, have to some degree begun that evacuation process. Now, the Rafah gate to the south is the connection, kind of an opening, a route between Gaza and Egypt. And there's been a lot of debate over the last few days on if it would be opened, how long it would be open, and so on and so forth. One of the arguments being put forward is, and this is, you're having to strike agreements between Israel and Egypt in this sense, right? Because it's moving from Gaza into Egyptian territory. And it sounds like, so first off, as of this recording, the Rafah gate has not yet opened, which means no humanitarian aid in and no civilians, no anybody exiting Gaza. Foreign nationals was one of the arguments to try to get out through Rafah gate. Now, it sounds like one of the arguments that has kind of reached an impasse and they're continuing to negotiate is that Egypt wants more humanitarian aid to come in to Gaza via the gate, and they want fewer civilians to leave. And the argument from the Egyptian perspective there is they don't want to have a humanitarian crisis on their hands all of a sudden with hundreds of thousands of people pouring into their country. Who knows when they're going to be able to go back? Will they ever be able to go back, right? That's a big ask of any country. We have to keep that in mind. Supposedly, or at least one argument, is that Israel wants less of the humanitarian aid to go in, but more civilians to exit Gaza. And you can kind of understand this. Now, on the one hand, that would risk more Hamas leadership being able to kind of sneak in as civilians to exit the battlefield to where they can't be targeted by the IDF. But when we're looking at this siege that Israel has put on around Gaza, no fuel, no water, although there were reports that some of the water had been turned on to the southern portions of Gaza over the last couple days, but generally it's a widespread siege across the entire area. And in a purely military sense, that is a good plan. So if you could look at an area and say there is nothing but military personnel there that we're going to have to fight at some point, it makes perfect sense, right? You don't want your adversary to have any capabilities. If you could keep your adversary from having any food, water, electricity for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 6 weeks before you go in and actually kick off the fight, great, right? Completely degrade them before the first shots are actually fired on the ground. Of course, that's not the case here. While there are plenty of Hamas militants and terrorists scattered throughout Gaza, there are also a lot of innocent civilians, a lot of innocent children, as we've talked about before. And to be fair, it was just a year ago when there was international condemnation for Russia targeting civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. Now, these are, very different countries, very different conflicts, but a civilian's a civilian. And I think one of the challenges that's going to continue to come forward here is the treatment of Palestinian civilians caught in this war, which from my perspective seems to be rather exclusive to the Middle East. There was a note here, I'll put up the article, saying that diseases have started to spread and dehydration has started to spread amongst children. We may see people killed that the conscience of the international Arab and Islamic world cannot handle. Now, my reading between the lines as to how some of this is played out is that it very much seems like the United States and Israel and many Israeli allies are viewing this as Hamas has to be eradicated. In order to do that, some civilians, unfortunately, will be killed. Kind of an argument of the ends justify the means. What I'm seeing from the broader Muslim community is that that is not acceptable, that no civilian deaths are acceptable in the eradication of Hamas. Now, it's worth noting that outside of Iran, you're really not seeing any support or justification for Hamas. But a lot of countries in the Middle East, a lot of Muslim communities are stepping up concerned about how the Palestinian civilians are being treated. And long term, that is the type of argument that organizations like the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, Hamas even, and others use to recruit people and say, look, Israel, the United States, XYZ, other countries don't care about Muslims. They're just killing everybody. And it's been effective in the past, and you can kind of start to see that rift opening here. Now, shifting to the United States actions and responses, it sounds like President Biden will be heading to Israel potentially on Wednesday, October 18th. There was news that came out yesterday that U.S. troops had received prepare to deploy orders. Now, of course, anything like that sparks some bad information flowing around. And from everything that I've seen, it looks like those are largely support personnel, medical personnel, EOD technicians, things like that, that would be deployed to the broader Middle East region. So it's not as though, those orders, those 2,000 people they're talking about, are not infantrymen going into Gaza. They're not artillerymen going to be firing against Hamas positions. They might not even end up in Israel at all. It's more just starting to get people ready just in case. I mean, we talked about just a second ago, the likelihood that there's a significant humanitarian crisis, regardless of the cause of that, the United States generally has mobilized troops to try to assist in some way possible. So don't take the U.S. prepare to deploy orders as any indication that we are, any closer today to entering this fight in a direct manner. Now, there was some reporting yesterday that I thought was worth bringing up here. Supposedly, the State Department had asked officials who work on public messaging about the Israel war to not use phrases like de-escalation, ceasefire, or restoring calm. And this reminded me of some periods of time during the war in Ukraine, where anybody who even brought up the idea that we should work towards peace was written off, labeled as a Putin supporter, and okay with accepting Ukraine ceding territory to Russia when they were just simply saying, should we at least talk about what peace could look like? How can we get towards that goal so fewer people are dying? And it feels very much the same here. Like, we can walk and chew gum. We can have that nuanced conversation, I think 100%. There should be a conversation as it relates to Israel, Gaza, and Hamas, how over time this can de-escalate, how over time we can get to a ceasefire, how over time calm can be restored in the region. Now, totally understand that Israel has all of the rights in the world to defend themselves, and they might not be at a point where they're ready to talk ceasefire or restoring calm. But the idea of trying to remove that entirely from the conversation, I don't know. Not really on board with that. But that's all I've got for now. Of course, if interested in national security subjects, be sure to check out the sit reps I put out on Substack. The link is in the description below. It's 7 to 10 of the top stories each week, along with podcast recommendations. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.